So, ladies and gentlemen, today on Sports File, we're going to take a look at probably one of the most popular Montreal Canadiens of all time, one of the best Montreal Canadiens of all time, and some consider one of the fastest hockey players on two blades in the history of pro hockey. Of course, we're going to be talking about Yvan Serge Cournoyer, better known as the captain of the Habs, and also his nickname, the Roadrunner, after the Warner Brothers cartoon character. Now, born in Drummondville, Quebec, he played with the Habs from 1963 to a injury-shortened 1979 season. Now, his nickname for a Roadrunner came from a lot of factors because, he had blazing speed, which he credited with having longer blades than a normal player. And according to published reports at the time, he had the body of a long track speed skater. He had thighs that would make Eric Hayden blush. Very, very in shape athlete, very, very quick strides. And in 2017, his great success, which also led him to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1982, allowed him to be named as one of the 100 greatest NHL players of all time. Now, Cournoyer got his start in hockey with the Montreal Junior Canadiens of the OHA in 1961. By the time he was 18 years old, he finally made it to the Habs in 1963 and earned a full-time spot with Montreal after a 7-game stint with the AHL's venerable Quebec Aces. Now, here's where the argument came in about Cournoyer. A lot of the Montreal coaching staff and affiliates felt he was a defensive liability and all he would be used for is playing on the power play. Now, for a few years, he was the first ever power play specialist in the NHL, but told Blake, who basically didn't really believe Cournoyer could play as a two-way player. That all changed, of course, when Blake left after the 68 Cup run and when Claude Royal gave Cournoyer a full-time shift. And, of course, Yvan responded with probably one of the better seasons of a Montreal Canadian player in the 60s with 40 goals, and he made the second All-Star team. Now, the points and goals started to increase, and by 1972 he had 47 goals. And, of course, his 1973 postseason where Montreal won the Cup, he had his best playoff ever, hitting 15 goals and 10 assists in 17 games, and earning the Conn Smythe Trophy as the Canadiens and the playoff MVP, beating the Chicago Blackhawks in 6 games. Now, he eventually became captain of the Montreal Canadiens in '75 after the retirement of Henri Richard, and it gave him a more of a frontline leadership role where he was leading by example before. And ironically, he broke a record. He became the only Montreal Canadiens captain to win consecutive Stanley Cups during his entire tenure as the captain, and the other was Maurice Richard. Now, it was, he was so fast on skates, he didn't really slow down in any shift, but a back issue that eventually led him to miss the 77 postseason started to hamper him. But his speed on the ice was more than graceful, more than quick. If you gave him the puck, he could basically, go end to end in less than, 6 or 7 seconds, which was pretty amazing. Now, 1978 season was a better one for Yvan Cournoyer, a comeback year. He hit 24 goals and 29 assists in 68 games. And the back issues, of course, were still hampering him. He had a great playoff again with 7 goals and 4 assists in 15 games against Boston. But you could tell these back issues were still having a big problem on his career, because he was a short man to begin with, 5'7", not the biggest NHL style with only 172 pounds. He was sort of a light heavyweight on skates. Now, by the start of the 1979 season, he couldn't continue for the rest of the year. He was a great fan on the sidelines as a motivator for the Habs fans. And when he retired, he only trailed Guy Lafleur, Maurice Richard, Jean Beliveau on the Canadiens' all-time scoring list. He won a total of 10 Stanley Cups as a player, second only to Henri Richard. Now, his totals include 428 goals scored, 435 assists, 6 in total overall points for the Habs. Now, but when his legacy really came into focus, it was the 1972 Summit Series against the Russians, because in Game 2 in the games in Russia, he was a key leader, a key producer. The infamous speedy goal in Game 2, which kind of secured Canada's win in that contest. And Cournoyer was a motivator for the younger players with the Habs and Team Canada were coming up, and he was a role model on every level. He basically was what you call the ideal player. He was an ideal on the power play, on defense, on the bench, a motivator. We all remember various key plays and assists throughout the years, especially against the Flyers in Boston, and when it was needed. But Yvan Cournoyer, a very gentlemanly guy, very positive guy. He's given back to the NHL in many ways. The Habs, the NHLPA, the Hockey Hall of Fame. And let me tell you something. Montreal Canadiens leaders at the time were immense. But to have someone like Cournoyer, that you could, he was a second, get this, he was a second line player with Montreal. Never played first line. He was shot Lafleur, or shot, Lafleur, shot and Mohavlich. He wasn't a first line player. Can you imagine if Cournoyer was playing on the first line with Boston, or the Maple Leafs, or the Flyers? He would have scored 50, 60 goals. But for what he was, again, one of the best overall athletes of all time, one of the best smaller NHL athletes of all time. We've had a lot of players of his size with the same talent, never really put up the points. So we can understand why Cournoyer never became the level of Lemieux and Gretzky, because he was a small package. But in today's NHL, I think with comparison, you look at Ovechkin and Connor McDavid, like the quick skaters. I think in the current NHL, he could score more goals because his line mates would open out to more ice for him, and then again he would add more ice time, because he would have thrived as a number one center. But in Montreal, the first and second and third line were crowded. He wasn't a fourth line player, but he's the best second line player in Montreal history, in my opinion. But that's just me. So on this floody day again in New Brunswick, we're telling everybody to watch the barricades, be careful. We tell you to keep your stick in the ice. And it's kind of sad no Montreal Canadian or Toronto Maple Leaf fans are really into the playoffs this year, because neither team is in the postseason. But we're going to talk about that more with the Davey Keon podcast that's coming up very soon. But, pass this on to your friends. If people are disappointed Montreal's not in the playoffs, tell them to listen to this podcast. And all the memories of Cournoyer's great playoff runs and playoff goals will come back like the smell of a beautiful poutine served for lunch at a Montreal eatery. You can smell the cheese and gravy, can't you? Have a good day. Bye.